Okay, so today we're going to be doing a install video to help show how these Dashbuilt seat bases, how they work and how they go in. So when you get the kit, it'll come something like this. You have your two main bases. These top pieces are just the tools that allow this to slide in and out and stay in the same plane, and you'll get some hardware included as well. Good. Okay, so today we're going to be showing an install on a fairly simple car. This is a Porsche Boxster, a spec Boxster. These cars, once you get the seat base frame out, it's a relatively flat floor. Cars like the Boxster, or basically anything Porsche makes, most BMW stuff is going to be flat, or it'll at least have one step that's easy to work with. And then a lot of the new GT86, FRS, BRZ chassis, all that stuff's flat. How you're going to start is you're going to find the seat base that's spot welded in here. Most of the time they won't be one large piece like this. It will be, maybe like a front row, and then the two rear ones will be individually spot welded in, just with like small frames. So what you're going to need to do is locate all the spot welds and drill all of them out. In this case, this one has a lot of spot welds. But yeah, you're just going to center punch them, drill out all your spot welds, and then you'll start by taking this frame out. And what this is going to allow you to do is, this is the first step in lowering this whole platform here. You can see all the existing mounting holes, and then when we pull this out, everything's going to be much lower. So we've already done this one. And you may still see the other side. We're going to leave that one in because, yeah, the driver's side's more important, and most of the time this is the only side you're going to have to do. So you can see here that the floor is fairly flat. We do have like a throttle cable that runs under here, but that shouldn't be an issue because our bases will be on either side here. But you can see all the spot welds that we drilled and sanded. In this case, this one took a few hours to get out, but there's really no rocket science to it. You just use a nice little spot weld drill bit, and really with any kind of sander or drill, you can do this yourself. You can find other videos or how-tos on how to drill spot welds if you don't know how to do that. So from here we're going to kind of start the process on how you're going to figure out how wide the bases are going to go, where you're going to put them, and how you're going to weld and support them in here. So to start, we're going to take our bases just by themselves, and we're going to bolt our side mounts onto our seat, and we're going to bolt these bases onto the side mounts. Now, just for adjustability in the future, we're going to use these center holes on both, and we are now going to determine the width that these are going to get fixed at and what we need to set our tools to. So let's go put these on the seat. Okay, something to consider with these seat bases here, and any side mounts you're going to use, is when designing this seat base, we did holes on 1/2-inch centers over the whole thing, and 1/2-inch centers left to right as well, just to kind of keep everything equal and easy to work with once you have holes in your side mounts that are equal within 1/2-inch centers. So the problem with this is most all side mounts that I have found, whether it be Sparco, Cobra, Recaro, Racetech, none of them use the same hole spacing on the bottom here, and I don't know why that is. That's just the way it is. So there is no way for us to design this seat base and it work just a direct bolt-on with all side mounts. So what happens here is, worst case scenario is you have to drill one hole in your side mount to make the seat base work. So basically what you're going to do is, when you're putting these on here, if your side mount has several holes here, or 2 or 3, I would pick the middle there, and then I'll pick the middle in this seat base here. Again, so in the future, if you go to a wider seat or narrower seat, there's adjustment here. So you'll start in the middle of the seat base, and what I would do is I would leave about the same overhang front to rear, so you can get your adjustment out of it once we get it in the car. So what I've done is I've picked a hole, I've picked the front hole up here, and I've put it in the middle with a small overlap. Now what you can't see, is that if you come back here, these don't, they just about line up. It's not perfect, so they're basically like overlapping like a 1/16 or so. So what you can do is you can either find a hole that does fit, because sometimes you'll get lucky. Like this one, for instance, will bolt right in. Okay, so because, and let me explain why that happens, is because these holes are on different centers, that by the time you look through here, you may actually find a hole that works. So it looks like further up, we do have a hole that actually fits in there, because these are on different centers. Okay, so if you can't find a hole that works, what you're going to need to do is you're going to either need to open up one of these holes just a little bit if you're only overlapping by like a 1/16, or you're going to need to drill a new hole. And so you can drill a new hole. These holes are fairly close together, so if there's enough room, you can drill one back here, or you can drill one up here. Or, I mean, if there's just absolutely nowhere to do this on your side mounts, you can either buy new side mounts or have these welded up and re-drill the holes. I've had to do that maybe once because there wasn't enough room to put a new hole. So this is basically your first hurdle you're going to run into, but like I said, because they're all on different centers and we use the same, you're likely going to find one that works. And here I am, about the 4th hole in on these race ticks. I found one that will bolt right in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get these seat bases on here, like I said, pretty neutral front to rear, and bolt them down in the middle. And then we're going to take some measurements. This is just for mock-up, so you don't need to crank them down like 1,000 foot-pounds. This is just for mock-up. Okay, so now our seat bases are all bolted on. They're all, you know, hand tight enough to not move around at all. And then again, we're splitting the difference on both sides, and then we're running down the middle. Now with all of this stuff snugged up, what we're going to do is we're going to get a measurement in between these in a few different spots. That way we can pull all this off and bolt our tools, replicating how wide this seat is. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take measurements. You can do outside to outside, or you can do inside to inside, however you want to do it. So what I'm going to do is take a couple down. What we've got here is 12 3/16 in the rear. I'll take one in the front. Okay, we're right about 12 1/4. I'll just take one. Okay, about 12 1/4 in the middle. So I should point out that if your seat has a taper to it where the rear is narrower than the front, which most seats will, this one has a very, very, very small taper, like maybe a 1/16. You're not going to want to install these bases at that taper, because it just won't work. Basically, when you try to scoot the seat forward and rearward, it's not going to line up with your holes. So what you need to do is you need to focus on splitting that difference, okay, and putting the seat bases in like that. It's important that you put the seat bases in parallel to each other, and then we worry about making sure the side mounts will actually bolt on. So basically, if your seat has a large split front to rear, you know, let's say you'll bolt the fronts on, and then I would just re-drill a hole in the rear that will line up as you're moving it front to rearward. You don't want to put these bases at that angle, because it's only going to work in one spot. So now that we have our measurements here, what we're going to do is we're going to take this off. I'll probably just stick with 12 1/4, just because we were just a smidge over here and we're about 12 3/16 back here. So yeah, so we're just going to pick 12 1/4. I'm going to get these all bolted together, and then we'll go back over to the car. Okay, so when you're bolting all these together, we just gave you a lot of adjustment here. It doesn't matter if you put this tool in the front or all the way up here, or which holes you use. I'm just spacing them out here. Really what this is for is if you have a really tight space or you have a large space and you need to modify the tool, it gives you several spots to do so. So we're just going to put them in a pretty neutral place, and then we will start getting them lined up. Okay, so we've got one side snug, and we should be able to slide our other piece in now. So what we're going to do is open this up to try to get our target of 12 1/4. So we have one. We're just going to snug it just a little, come over to this side, and snug one of these just a little. Now we're just going to double check everything. This side actually can come in a little. Okay. Okay, so now that everything is where you want it, we're going to go ahead and snug this stuff up. You can go ahead and tighten this pretty well, just because you don't want anything to move around. Okay, we'll double check it one last time. So we've got all this how we want it, but we need to make sure that the bases are actually in the same line, plane this way, forward and rearward. So because these holes have to have machine tolerance in this bracket here, technically your bases can be off this way. So what we want to do is take some sort of square, it can be a drywall square, or just something that's large enough, and you want to check, you want to double check all this. And so we're actually off here, I'll show you. So when we line our square up here and this one's touching, it's actually off. So what we need to do is make an adjustment here. And if we can't do it with just one, we're going to have to crack these open. Okay, so then we will snug them. Just one for now so we can take our measurement. Okay, 12 1/4, 12 1/4. Okay, so now you can see that this is square. This is lined up here and it's lined up on both the bottoms. What you don't want is for this to be off, of course, to where your seat, you're going to run into all kinds of problems. The seat's not going to bolt in there straight. So now that we're sure that this is square and the correct width that we want, we're finally ready to take it to the car. Okay, so once you get your setup back in the car, you're going to kind of look forward and rearward on how the seat's going to be placed, kind of get an idea. Now, if the driver isn't changing the forward position too much based on the stock seat bracket location, then you don't need to be too worried about this. So we're pretty well in the same spot that the original seat base was in. So now what we need to do is determine left to right positioning, and now the angle of a tilt that we're going to put in it, and then exactly how low we're going to recess this in the car. So most cars are going to want the seat further into the trans tunnel. Like BMW and Porsche is really bad about having the column and the pedals kind of offset to the seat in a factory position, and it's really annoying if you ever notice it, you can't stop thinking about it. So most of the guys that do this, even with some of the stuff that's already on the market, we are always constantly trying to get the seat closer to the trans tunnel. So with this, you have a little bit of extra help there. Now, something you want to be mindful of is you don't want to put the seat base somewhere to where when you bolt your seat in, there's not enough clearance. Like say there was a bracket or something coming off here for an e-brake or whatever it may be. You don't want to put this so far in that the seat isn't actually going to clear. I mean, unless you plan on cutting all that out. Now in this case, it's a pretty standard trans tunnel, so what we're going to do is we're going to push it in pretty far, and then we're going to start working on how low we actually want it and if we're going to put any tilt in it. So this car is pretty, the seat pan is pretty low, so I don't think I'm actually going to cut the floor out. In some extreme cases, if you are trying to just get the absolute most clearance, you can actually gain maybe another ½ inch by doing this, but you can trace around these and actually recess these down into the floor. But you just have to be mindful if there's enough clearance for like your harnesses, because your crotch belts have to go in here. The bottom of the seat bucket usually sits lower than this base anyways, so you got to be careful with all that. Unless you're going to recess this whole thing down in there, and you got to make sure you're going to have enough room in this area, because like I said, your eye bolts are typically going here, or the seat bucket where your butt sits usually drops down in here. So we're kind of in a good spot right here. So what I'm going to do is going to kind of play around with this, kind of get them pointed, and make sure they're straight ahead, make sure they're lined up with the trans tunnel and this rocker panel over here. And what we'll do is we'll just measure it to see if it's pointed straight. But anywho, we'll do something like this, and we're going to get it in the position we want, and then we're going to start tracing around all of this and get it sanded so we can start welding and supporting these bases in here. Okay, so now that we have our positioning front to rear, left to right, we just want to make sure that the bases are pointed straight and they're not tilted one way or the other. So what I did is I just took some measurements here to make sure. Actually need to cut this a little bit. Another little adjustment. And we can finalize all this here in a second, but you just want to get it close so you can clean the right areas. So okay, so this is all pointed straight. Now, okay, so now you have left to right, forward to rear. You got to determine now your tilt front to rear, and obviously you've got to have it level left to right. There's going to be no tilt. So just make sure the car is level, which we are favoring this bubble on the left side just a hair. So what we'll do is we'll start looking at our level and determining. The tools are a great place to put your level because they're in between both bases, and these are made of 3/16 304 stainless, so they're pretty beefy. So you can see right now that it actually wants us to tilt this back corner down. Okay, so we're going to be somewhere in between this wobble here. So, and I'll show you how we're gonna find out, or how we're gonna secure level here in a minute. But now that we know where we're gonna be, I'm gonna mark around these, and we're going to clean the metal in this area. That way we can go ahead and tack it and do whatever supports with sheet metal or boxing in that we're going to need to do. Okay, so we have the whole area cleaned now. So now what we're going to do is just kind of do the final placement. That way we can get a tack or two into place at the right position and then start supporting all this in place. So I got the front to rear position just about where I want it. We've got to get all this right. Okay, so now this is set up this way where we want it. So now we have to get the angle where we want it. So what I'll do is, now that we're getting a little more precise, I'm just going to use my digital level. Kind of get a read, zero it where I couple different spots on the car. Let's check. Okay, well, it's not very tappy. We're getting like a half a degree difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to start. And what we're going to do is get this tilted up into place. So you guys probably can't see the angle, but that there shows 0. So what we're going to do is kind of split the difference in this wobble like we talked about and get it tacked in the spots that are touching the car. Okay, while you're tacking these, it'd be a good idea to have someone at least watching out under the car with a water spray bottle or some compressed air to blow out any little flames that might arise. So if you've got any line, you want to look under the car, make sure you don't have any fuel lines, brake lines, anything like that. Pretty much every car on one side or the other will have all the lines running down it, so you need to make sure you're not going to catch anything on fire. And there will just be some plastic clips there. You can pull everything down, you know, put like a piece of aluminum or sheet metal or something in there to keep all that happy. And then it's always nice to have someone watch while you're doing this. While we're tacking, it's not as big of a deal, but when we start to weld all this through, I'll definitely have someone watching all this. So now that everything is tacked in where we want it, what we're going to do now is we need to get the seat in here to test everything, to test fit the spot where we have everything. So what I'm going to do is this back corner, because it's floating, is still just a little bit loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a support for this back corner, and then we'll be able to take the tools out, bring the seat, put it in, sit in it, make sure it all works. You know, if you have the customer available, now's the time to kind of make sure that seating position works. So that's what we're going to do from here. Okay, so now we have supported this base a little bit. We put one of our side supports in here. So we went ahead and unbolted the tools, and everything's in here, tacked in strong enough for us to put the seat in sending it and make sure everything's fine. So whenever you're doing this install, unless you're basically just going to cut out all the space you need to do this, you're likely going to find a spot where one of them is pretty happy, and then to where you don't have to do an extensive amount of work on one side. Basically find one of the corners that's happy, and then that's where you're going to tack, and then from there on you'll kind of build your supports and whatever gaps need to be filled in from here. So as you can see, well, you may or may not be able to see this, but this one's basically flat, like all the way to here, which means it'll basically get welded just all the way around there to the factory sheet metal. We have a real small gap up here, and then this is all touching here, so this will get welded, and then we'll build this whole back section up with basically like a OEM style support. We'll use like a 18 or 16 gauge sheet metal here, and something just a little bit beefier than what the factory stuff is, and caps all that in just like the factory was. So now we're going to get our seat, put it in here, and see how all that lines up. Okay, so now you can see we've got the seat put in here. It went right in as far as all of our bolt hole spacing. We just you know, you got to fish your bolts down in this side again. Be careful how tight you put the seat to the tunnel. We've got about, I don't know, an inch and a quarter that we could still go that way if we really wanted to. But we're pretty much centered here. If anything, we've moved this way a little bit, so which is great because we get away from the door, we get away from the door bars, and we have a whole bunch of headroom now. So something that's notorious about these cars is your head. No matter how you do this A-pillar tube, because the roof is shaped like a turtle shell, it's just really difficult to build this A-pillar. And so, you know, I do the best job I can, but sometimes it's just still really tight. So what this does is gives you just miles of room here. I'm 6 foot, so yeah, we don't have the seat you know, super duper far back or far forward. This is kind of a neutral position. We can still go either way, and we can still go left and right a half inch as well. So yeah, so I think this is going to fly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and weld everything up, and I think this is good to go. Okay, so here we have the bases all tacked in with all of our little sheet metal supports. So you can see on that side it's basically going to be just going to be welded to the floor. On the front part here we've had to add a little bit of sheet metal to cover the gap that's going to go in between, but basically this side will be flush all the way here, and then to take up the room in the back, we've done these, 18 gauge sheet metal supports that surround the whole back side of this guy. Now, once you get everything locked into place and tacked in, it's not super difficult. You just make these templates out of paper, and then cut them with whatever you have to cut them to go in here. So basically now everything's ready for final welding. So what we're going to do, we'll get the car up in the air, at least on jack stands, so we can have a good eye on everything that's going on underneath it. And this is it. This is the seat base install for the Dashbuilt low mounts, low seat bases. And once it all gets welded, it'll get painted, just chassis color, whatever the customer wants. So that's it. Okay, so now we're taking a look at my car. This is a 240SX, and this is probably one of the most difficult cars to do this in, because from the factory there is a lot of sheet metal here, and basically this whole thing humps up, and it's designed to clear the catalytic converter. Now, I don't know why they needed all this room, but basically this entire thing is this large 3D object, and then the seat base literally bolts to the top up here, and then over here it has this large raised piece, so you're about 4-5 inches above the floor here. So it makes it a great candidate to do this, but this is probably the most involved install that you're gonna see. So what we do is we take all of that 3D sheet metal and we just cut it away, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna just make this flat. We're gonna resheet this. Of course, we're in the rough stages right now, but we're gonna resheet this, secure everything off, and then that will leave us a nice, you know, flat surface, or at least much flatter surface to install our seat bases. So we were initially going to do the video on this car, but I figured this is kind of not the best example and might scare some people away. So yeah, a job like this is probably around 15 hours, you know, full install, whereas the Boxster is probably around like a 6 or 7 hour install altogether. So yeah, that's that. We'll I'll be updating this car and maybe posting some pictures once I determine what we come up with. But